Hello and welcome to tutorial 2 of the Platemaker Wizard. So let's start Excel. And we've already done tutorial 1, or you should have already done tutorial 1. Now tutorial 1 can be done with an unactivated version of the software, but the other tutorials you need to purchase a license in order to do these. So in order to do tutorial 2, we're now going to go down to the help demonstration workbook. We want to open up the instruction manual. So we'll do that. And once we've opened the instruction manual, we want to go to tutorial 2, which is here. So I'm going to click on tutorial 2. And the first thing I need to do is also put the Platemaker Wizard back into tutorial mode. Before we purchase the Platemaker Wizard, it's always in tutorial mode by default. But once you've purchased it, it is never in tutorial mode unless you actively tell it to be in tutorial mode. And the way you do that is you go down to Program Options and you click Tutorial Mode and Finish. And now it's in tutorial mode. So we are now ready to continue our tutorial. So let's switch across back to our tutorial. And the first thing it's telling us to do on our crib sheet is to open the file Jenny Lyrics, which is located in the Platemaker Wizard data folder in the tutorial folder. So let's do that. So I click on here, I go to my documents, I use the shortcut to get to the Platemaker Wizard data folder, which is by default saved in the public directory on the computer if it hasn't been moved to a network directory. And there's the tutorial folder, which contains all the tutorial information. And there's my Jenny Lyrics PDF. So I'll open that file. And there is the lyrics to the famous rock song Jenny 8675309. Let's go back to my crib sheet. So I've opened that. It's now telling me to create a new data entry workbook. And I want to select the ovarian cancer screen demonstration template. So let's do that. So we switch back to the Platemaker and I select Create New Data Entry Workbook. Because it's in tutorial mode, this is already ticked. I just need to select the ovarian cancer screen demonstration template. And as soon as I do that, it fills out a bunch of information that has already been saved in the template. So you can see the experiment title is just the template name title. It has the media used, the well contents, which was patient-derived ovarian cancer. There is no experimenter name because obviously a different experimenter could be doing this experiment. The experiment duration is 72 hours. The plate design was 3 sample numbers and the samples are grouped. We'll go through that in further detail in later tutorials. And it also has information, other relevant notes, which was saved with this template. So the first thing I want to do following on to the tutorial is to save the file. So I'm going to click Save File. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that these boxes now change to drop-down boxes. The experiment title has now been removed, so you can put your own experiment title in, which can be different obviously from the template name. And it also defaults to add to experiment register. Now, if you do not want to be adding your training workbooks to your experiment register, that should be kept for proper experiments. So in the tutorial crib sheet, it tells you to untick this box. I'm going to leave it ticked though, because I want to show you how it also adds this information to the experiment register, since we're obviously training you how to use the program. But if you're doing it, please untick this box so you don't contaminate your proper lab experimental register with training workbooks. The next thing we have is organization name, or if you have the academic version of the Platemaker Wizard, this will say project area. And the organization name, if you look at this at the moment, there's only one thing that's present, which is tutorial. And this was the folder that was created when we did tutorial 1. So just to explain what's happening here, if we switch over and I go into customers, you can see there is just this one single folder, tutorials. Inside that folder, there is my username. Inside that, in tutorial 1, we created 2 different workbooks, the ovarian cancer screen demonstration workbook using that template. And if you remember, we did all the data analysis, so there's all our prism graph files. And the other one we did was data analysis demonstration. So this is why we have these 2 files. This was all done in tutorial 1. If you haven't done tutorial 1 yet, I strongly recommend you do it. You can do it with an unlicensed version of the Platemaker Wizard. So what we're going to do now is, you can see that because we only have this single organization tutorials, that's the only one that exists. So I'm going to create a new organization. I'm going to call this Bensonium. So this is the name of my company, Bensonium. And as soon as I go off this, you will see it says, do you want me to create a new organization folder for you? Note this action will create a folder in your data workbook folder with the name Bensonium. So I'm going to say yes to that. And you can see now that if I go back to here, it's done exactly what it said it would do. There you can see this new empty folder. I'm now going to create a customer name. So the customer name again will just be me, but I'm going to call it this time, I'm going to use my surname as well, Rod Benson. And as soon as I click off this, you will see it says, do you want me to create the customer name folder for you? Note this action will create a new folder, Rod Benson, in the project folder you selected. I say yes. If you're using the academic version, this will be project area and this will be project manager. So just slightly different nomenclature, but the same sort of idea. And you can see that now under Bensonium, we now have this new folder, Rod Benson. And finally, the experiment title. So I am going to call this is an ovarian screen. I'm going to say this was patient 8675 309, which has an obvious link to the Jenny Jenny song. So we now come to the experimenter name, and if we switch back to our crib sheet, you will see that the experimenter name we enter is Rosalind Franklin. So let's do that. So I'm going to enter Rosalind Franklin. So Rosalind Franklin, like so. And it's 72 hours. So I'm just following on here. And then the final thing I'm going to do is, in my other relevant notes sections, I want to add Jenny Jenny, the first verse of Jenny Jenny, to my other relevant notes. So the way we do this is, if I now just switch back to the data crib sheet, I already have Jenny Jenny opened. It's here. There's verse 1. So I'm simply going to select verse 1 and I'm going to copy. I can do this with Control C, or I can right click and say copy. I now switch back to my workbook and I want to add it here. Now, interestingly enough, I want to put some returns in. As you know, in Excel, the Alt return key will add line breaks. In the Excel forms, you need to use Control return. So I'm going to push Control return twice to give a space, and then I go Control V to paste in verse 1 of Jenny Jenny. And that is what you're being told to do in the crib sheet, which is here. Now, it also makes a note that you cannot use this method if you're trying to copy information from another Excel workbook, because you can't select anything inside the cells when this page is open. However, I have provided a button that allows you to add external notes from an Excel workbook if you need to do that. Now, this is not recorded in your tutorial, but I'm going to show it to you as another method. This is explained in detail in the user manual. So if I push the help key, you can see it comes up. And this really goes through all of page 1. It also explains, by the way, the difference between experimental repeats and sample repeats. It goes through all of this, but here it is describing how to add notes that are inside an Excel workbook. So we're going to do that now. So although this is not part of your tutorial, I'm going to show you as part of this tutorial so you get a full understanding of the different ways you can add notes to this section. First of all, I'm going to delete this again because we're going to get it from a different place, like so. I'm going to push add external workbooks, and you can see this is just an empty workbook. What I actually need is I need to go back to the tutorial, and you can see I've also provided the lyrics, but this time inside an Excel workbook. So I'm going to open that, and when it opens, you'll see that there is no little return button. So what I have to do is I go Alt-Tab to go back to book 1. I then simply click OK, and then I push the button again, and this time, because there are now 2 workbooks open, I can select the second workbook, which is the one I want. I can select the lyrics I want, so this time we'll take the lyrics, say, down to here, 8675309. I select OK, and you can see that the lyrics have now been added to the workbook. I'm just going to get rid of these extra returns. So there's the lyrics. And that's the other way you can do it if you're adding notes from an Excel workbook. Sometimes you will want to add things from an external workbook if you've already created a workbook but you're moving data into a more updated workbook. You may just want to copy the information that was in your original workbook into a new workbook, and this is why this button can be useful. So we've added general information about our experiment, but we can also add multiple experiments, and this is what we're going to do here. So we're going to add 2 experiments with 2 different experiment dates. So let's do that. So if we go back and follow our crib sheet, you will see that it tells us the first experiment that we want to add is going to be the 23rd of July 24, or if it's American, you'd enter it as 7/23/24. This date field is set by whatever international settings are on your computer, so whether you have American or UK settings. I am based in the UK, so I have it as day, month, year, which of course is the correct way to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'll just delete this and show you how you just enter the date manually. So I type 23/7 and then 2024, like so. And it also gives you a space for confluency. And the reason I've put cell confluency is because, especially with high content screening experiments, I would strongly recommend that as an experimentalist you always record the cell confluency in the experimental page of the container workbook, because cell confluency can have a dramatic effect on how the cells respond in an experiment. So in our example here, the cell confluency we've got is 80%, so I'll put 80%. And then finally, we have another notes section. So the other relevant notes section is kind of for global notes, which cover all the experiments you've entered. This would be for notes that are very particular to that individual execution of the experiment on the 23rd of July 2024. I don't have any notes to add, so if we follow the example, we're just going to put notes for experiment 1. So let's just do that. So notes for experiment 1, and now I can click the add experiment and you can see it drops in there. It always then increments the date by 1 week, so you can see it's done that. 7 days is the 30th of 7th, but if you look at my instructions, the second experiment we want to enter is on the 1st of August. And for the second date, I'm going to use the blue calendar button just to show you this at work. So I simply click on the blue calendar button and it's telling me that the second date that it wants is the 1st of August. So there's July, you can see the 1st of August is a Thursday. So I can simply click on the 1st of August, and when I do that, it returns the 1st of August to that position. If I now return to my crib sheet, you can see that it wants me to enter 70% as a cell confluency, so let's do that. So that becomes 70%, and the notes for experiment 2 is again just notes for experiment 2. I click add experiment, and now I have both my experiments in as instructed in the crib sheet. So what I'm going to do now is, if I was to push build workbook, it would save the whole thing to Bensonium rod.benson exactly, and would call it this file. But I'm going to just delete Bensonium for a moment and show you what happens. If I try and build the workbook now, you'll see it will fail. And the reason it fails is because it needs an organization name, or if it's the academic version, the project area, it needs a project manager or customer name, and it needs an experimental title to save the file. It needs that to know where to save it on your computer. If any of those information is missing, it'll say that you've requested to save the file, but you've not entered enough information. If you don't have that information, if you still want the file to be saved, click yes, and it'll return you so you can add the information. If you click no, it'll build the workbook, but it'll simply won't save. It'll just be book 2. It'll just come up as. I do want to save it, so I'm going to say yes. It's now asking for an organization name, and this time I'm actually not going to save the file under Bensonium. I'm going to save it where you've been told to save it, which was under tutorials, if you look at in your instructions. If you're doing this and your lab has already got lots and lots of customers or project areas, you don't want to be saving these training tutorials anywhere except for in the tutorial folder so that they don't get mixed up with your real work. So I'm going to save it in tutorials. I'm going to save it under my name again, Rod, and I have to enter again patient 8675309. And now we are ready to go. I simply click Build Workbook, and as soon as I do that, it builds the workbook. So we'll let it build the workbook. So you can see it's building the workbook, and when it's finished, we'll come back and see what it's done. Okay, so it's built the workbook. There are the plate maps. And let's have a look what it's done. So again, it's saved it as patient 8675309. If we look at where it saved it, if we go to here, remember we saved it this time under tutorials. So it's customers, tutorials, Rod, and there it is, patient 8675309. That is our new workbook. It's not saved under Bensonium because we remember we didn't continue with Bensonium, so that's still empty even though the folders are still there. So that's where it's been saved. We'll now return to the workbook, patient 8675309. There's the plate maps. Now, the plate maps are interesting. So if you remember tutorial 1, we didn't have this extra column because in tutorial 1, it only had one experiment, so it was irrelevant. But in this one, we have 2 different experiments. So you can see now we have an extra plate map, experiment 1 and experiment 2. So in tutorial 1, we had 3, 3, 8, 4 plates. This time we have 6 because the experiment's been duplicated twice. Likewise, on the experiment details page, we now have all the information. So it's tutorials, Rod, experimenter Rosalind Franklin, patient derived ovarian cancer, 72 hours. These are the negative positive controls. We have this extra table here. You can see the 23rd, that's notes for experiment 1, 80%. And we have the second experiment date. We also have that recorded in the flat data file as well. So you can see how that's expanded out and it's recorded in the plate maps. So this is a bigger experiment because obviously it's been done twice. So this is showing you how page 1 works of the Platemaker wizard and how we can use a template to quickly build previously designed experiments, but we can still modify on the fly. So on page 1 we can choose to add more experiments, which is what I've done here. If we just go view and I click headings and I move down, you will see that below this we have the derived dependent variables that are also on here. We're going to focus on this for a little bit now because I want to explain the ability of the Platemaker wizard to take the dependent variables that have been defined for the experiment. So in this one, the 2 dependent variables were cell count and cell death, and from that derive new readings by mathematically combining these measured dependent variables. So the new derived variables are cell count normalized, cell death normalized, and cell demise, and we're going to look at that now. So the first thing I want to do is I want to use a PowerPoint presentation to explain the formulas. The formula I want to explain is this one, cell death normalized. So let's do that. So if we look at the plate, the way it works is these are all the samples that we have along here, and then in the center of the plate we had the negative controls here and the positive controls here. So there are 14 negative controls. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take those 14 negative controls and we want to average those negative controls. And then what we want to do is for each individual sample we'll have a percent cell death. So we want to take the sample percent cell death and we want to subtract from that the average negative control. So we're subtracting the background so that we end up with a new reading. However, in this particular experiment, the background cell death can be around 20 to 30%. So as soon as we do that, it now means that the maximum value that cell death could be if it was at 100% would only be at 70% because we've subtracted the average negative control. So we want to rescale back to 100%. And the way we do that is using this formula. So you can see we have the average control cell death of those 14. For each individual sample death, we've just subtracted the average control cell death. but we also then divide it by 100 minus the average cell control depth, which gives a ratio between 0 and 1, and then we multiply by 100 so it rescales to 100%. So that's the formula for cell death normalized. Now there is an issue, however. If the sample cell death is less than the average control cell death, then this number is negative. We don't want that. So we're going to also use an Excel function, an if function, so that it checks to see if this value is negative. If it is, then it puts it at 0. If it's positive, then it just uses this calculation. So the final formula will look like this. And this is the exact formula that you see. If I go back here, this is the exact formula you see here. So let's just go through it. So it says cell death normalized. If cell death, so if one of these sample cell death is less than the average negative control, put 0. If it's not, then use this formula, which is cell death minus average negative control times 100 divided by 100 minus average negative control. So that's the formula. So what I'm going to do is show you how that formula appears in the flat data file, and this is the last thing we're going to do. So what we're going to do is, if we go back to our crib sheet, which is here, so we're now all the way down here, and we're now explaining this part. So this is what I'm working through now. And I'm just going to show you how this works in the flat data file. So this is the bit we're up to. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the flat data file, and from the flat data file, the first thing I want to show you is this averaging of the negative control. So you can see here is the 14 negative controls on plate 1. This is for cell count. We could look at this for cell death if you want. Let's just do cell death. So this is the 14 DMSO controls for cell death. And if I go to negative control average, and I just click on this one here, so there it is there, you can see this is the average formula. If I just click F2, you'll see that when I do that, it's actually averaging as expected the 14 cell death percentages above it and creating this single value which it's going to use in the formula. So let's now look at the formula. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to unfilter everything, and we're now just going to follow the instructions from our crib sheet. So it is telling us first of all to select plate number filter to 2. So let's do that. So we go here, plate number to 2, which we've done. The next filter it is telling us to set is it wants the class filter other therapy and negative control average. So let's do that. So it's other therapy and negative control average, just so we see those. And then the compound filter is bortezomib and DMSO. So the compound filter is bortezomib and DMSO, which is there. You can see now it's shrinking right down. And then the final filter is dose filter 100 and 0. So dose filter 100 and 0. And now you can see we have a very small section of the flat data file, but this will show you how these formulas are working. So let's do that. So you can see this is producing figure 46, which is here. Okay, so this is figure 46. And if we now look at figure 46, if we go to cell death normalized, so we're going to go to cell death normalized for here, which is other therapy bortezomib 2. Here we have this what looks like quite complex formula. You can see it's pulling out numbers from all the different parts of the table which we have filtered. If I click F2, you'll see those numbers. So you can see that it's taking the other therapy bortezomib, so this is this value here. It's comparing it to the average negative control. If that value is less than the negative control, it simply puts in 0, which is here. If it isn't, then it does the formula. Look at the formula. So it's I222. So it's this value minus the background, which is that value, times 100 divided by 100 minus the background value to rescale, so that we end up with this value, which is the cell death normalized. So that is showing you how the Platemaker Wizard has not only built the container workbooks, where as data is entered into here, it's going to enter into the flat data table, but then it can take those values and further down in the table it can start to create formulas that you define using the Platemaker wizard. And we will learn in a later tutorial how we define these formulas on page 4 of the wizard. The formulas themselves look exactly like this. So on page 4 you will have a field where you enter the formula and it looks exactly like this. Now just one final thing, if we go back to the crib sheet, you will see that it is worth working through figure 46 because I do all 3 examples. So we've just done cell death, but there is also cell count and cell demise. So let's just look at those very quickly. So let's go back to here. We will go back to the flat data file. So remember we looked at cell death normalized for bortezomib. We're now going to look at cell count normalized, which is this one for bortezomib. If we click F2, we can see the formula is using cell count. We have the cell count for bortezomib. It first checks if it is less than the average negative control cell count. If it is, it puts in a 0. If it isn't, it uses a formula which is similar to the cell death. It's a little bit of a different formula. Again, you can look at how that works, but it basically normalizes cell count, so it's a percentage after subtracting the background. So now we have these 2 formulas, cell count normalized and cell death normalized. If we now go finally to the other therapy for bortezomib, cell demise, you will see that it is now picking up these derived formulas and averaging them. So the really cool thing about the Platemaker wizard is once you've entered a formula, you can then pick up the formula later and string them together to come up with very complex formulas and intermediate calculations. Now an interesting question here is in the nomenclature of the Platemaker wizard, you will see that for cell count normalized, the parameter entered is average negative control, and for cell death normalized, it's average negative control. But the interesting thing is this one is the average negative control for cell count, this one's for cell death. How does it know that? This is also addressed in the final section of how it works out which negative control to use. But the rule that it uses is whatever measured variable precedes the average negative control, so this is cell death, it'll therefore grab the cell death negative control. For cell count, this precedes this one, so it'll grab the average negative cell count. And if cell count and cell death were in the same formula with an average negative control, whichever one this is physically closer to, it'll grab that one. So that's how it passes these formulas. And this is all explained inside the tutorial 2 crib sheet, and also in the second section Platemaker wizard equation editor as well. But we'll cover this in later tutorials. Now the final thing I want to show you is the experimental register. So if you remembered, at the very beginning I selected to save this file we built into the experimental register, and you're now going to see the experimental register and how it works. So if we flick back for a moment to the customers directory, I've now also behind the scenes added some more data, some more subfolders to the customer folder, which also contain workbooks, so that I can give some data for the experimental register. So I've just created some artificial workbooks just so the experimental register that I'm about to show you has some data in it. So if we now switch back to the workbook we have just built, I am going to close this workbook, and then if I go up to Platemaker, I can open the experimental register. This is actually an Access database, so I simply open it here. And you can see that it gives you a good view of all the experiments you've built if you've asked them to be added to the register. Now in the tutorial instructions you had, you purposely were told not to add it because obviously you have a real functioning lab. You don't want to be adding your training workbooks, but in this demonstration all the data is just made up anyway. It's obviously I'm not a real CRO, so it's just to demonstrate how the program works. So you can see you can have all these different views of the experiments. So this is an organizational staff view. So you can see these are the different staff. There's me, Rod, there's Jenny Jackson, and the different experiments. Elton John, and he has Goodbye Yellow Brick Road associated with in this workbook. If I want to go into this workbook, I just click here, and you can see this is the front page of the workbook. It's Elton John's the customer name, testing scientist was Matthew Higgs, the workbook status is built, or it might be experiments in progress. I can open the workbook and actually have a look at this as the workbook with the plate maps. So you can see I can very quickly maneuver around the CRM. I can close this window, or I can look at it from lab staff view. So there's me, or Karen Carpenter. This is her workbook. We didn't start the fire. There she is there. This is Cat Stevens, is the customer. Again, I can open the folder path if I want to. So I can actually physically see where the file is located. There you are, customers AstraZeneca, Cat Stevens, we didn't start the fire. Or I can open the workbook. There's the workbook, there's the plate maps, there's the text maps of that particular workbook. You get the idea. I can also do searches. So again, I could go to organization. I can search all these different things. If I wanted to say, look at workbook name, I can do a search on the workbook name. Again, patient 123. There's patient 123. Down the bottom there's also patient 8675309 by John Smith, Rod Benson. I can again open the workbook as we do here. This is this workbook. So you're getting the idea of how we can use the register, how the register keeps track of all the different workbooks in the Platemaker Wizard data section. So as this section grows very large, you have a complete relational database to keep track of all your work. Interestingly enough, the Platemaker Wizard also provides another little section that allows you to sweep the experimental register. What that actually means is if you need to synchronize the register with the file structure that's actually physically located inside your server, you can do that with this operation. I'm not going to show you that now. It's described in the manual about sweeping the register and what that actually means. Okay, so that just gives you a brief overview of the Access database that also is shipped with the Platemaker Wizard. By the way, it is also located, you can see here at the very front in the Platemaker Wizard data. So you don't have to necessarily open it from inside Excel. If I have Excel closed, and I also, let's reclose the experimental register here, I can open it just by double clicking on the file and get to it this way. So there's two ways of getting to it. So that's the experimental register, which I think you will find very, very useful. Okay, so that is the end of tutorial 2 of the Platemaker Wizard. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like if you're watching it on YouTube, and please also consider subscribing to my YouTube channel of Bensonium Tutorials. I hope that you find this program useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in tutorial 3. Until then, I wish you well with all your experiments, and happy Platemaker Wizard building. Bye!